3M welcomes Dr. Andrew Heyman to our stage. Dr. Heyman is an internationally recognized pioneer, scientist, clinician, and educator in integrative and metabolic medicine and has held several leadership positions in the field. He is triple board certified in family medicine, integrative medicine, and anti-aging and regenerative medicine, and is the program director of integrative and metabolic medicine at the George Washington University. His research interests include the stress response and neuroendocrinology, cardiometabolic disease, men's health, and clinical outcomes research methodologies. Dr. Heyman is the president of Integrative Health Resources and is a celebrated speaker around the world. He is the director of academic affairs at the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, and his teaching approach is deeply rooted in scientific evidence, grounded in expert patient care, and is readily accessible to both the new learner and seasoned practitioner alike. Welcome to the stage, Dr. Heyman.
Welcome. It's an honor always to open the conference. I get to do it every year, and it always feels the same. It feels special and unique, and I'm very privileged to be the Director of Education for A4M, and to have that role of overseeing basically all of what you learn in all the different modules and venues that we offer. So it's something that I take to heart, and today is sort of no less important, and in some ways I think it's even more important. So I often reflect on each year, what do I want to say? Do I want to talk about a breakthrough treatment or some sort of interesting lab or an approach to a clinical case? Where do I go? What do I choose? How do I reach the audience, in a sense? Last year I went over the history of longevity and talked about how it's not a new idea, it's thousands of years old, this sort of pursuit of vitality and wellness, and how it's transformed in different cultures and different traditional healing systems around the world. And we just apply that idea in a very unique and advanced way through anti-aging. So I was sitting at my desk, reflecting on this a few months ago in the middle of a clinic. And I thought, what am I going to say this year that's different? And something that I think we all could kind of connect to no matter where you started in your professional journey. So I thought, why don't I talk about a normal clinic day for me? And I think some of you will resonate with this. So here are some patient intakes that I typically see. So here's a patient, she had been sick for many years and had lived in the Bay Area, developed asthma and uncontrolled weight gain, extreme fatigue, neuropathies, weakness, Hashimoto's, nutritional deficiencies, marching towards diabetes. And she said, I used to be a healthy, functioning person. Now I'm bedridden. I'm a shadow of myself. How do I get my life back? Does that sound familiar to you in your practice? Here's another gentleman, 55 years old, presented with a working diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. He had declined to the point where over the last several years he was dependent on a cane and eventually a motorized wheelchair, and he could only stand for several minutes due to his chronic spasticity. And he was convinced that we were going to uncover through testing a mold exposure or Lyme disease or some sort of other biological toxin that was literally destroying his nervous system. Or this young man, 24-year-old, who had to drop out of Brown University because of sudden onset panic attacks, anxiety, depression. He felt depersonalized, he felt crippled, he felt his whole body had numb. He was a star athlete, and his parents, having resources, sent him around the world And I'm sure you recognize some of the treatments that he underwent: IVIG, plasmapheresis, rituximab. He was diagnosed with pandas and Lyme and mold. He went to Mexico and did immunotherapy with plasma exchange, and on and on and on. And this is really sort of the parade of patients that I see. And if you do this long enough in your practice, this is likely what you'll end up with. As I joke, my clinic is the island of misfit toys. And in the recent months, in the past year and a half or so, I've had 3 patients commit suicide. Depression, isolation, despondence, hopelessness. They reach their end. And sometimes you're the last provider. They've seen 10 or 20 other practitioners. They've had all the treatments, all the diagnoses. Nobody knows what's wrong with them. And if you do this work long enough, you will see all of life and death parade through your practice, as it will likely in your own life. I think it's what makes us human. It's what connects us to each other. It's what makes this style of practice incredibly special. But when you encounter this kind of patient, and I'm sure many of you do, I think there are a number of fundamental questions that we have to ask. How are we going to deal with the human suffering that we see every day? What is the path of a healer? How do we cultivate compassion? And can we help patients address their woundedness and still find joy? And ultimately, you have to ask yourself, why are you here today? What are you seeking? Some sort of grace or insight, a chance to evolve into a new kind of practitioner, something more meaningful. I think that stands at the heart of what we do here at A4M. But it's not something we often talk about, and yet these questions will find you. And it reminds me of a book that was written and published in 2016 called The Book of Joy. And it's a discussion over 5 days between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Both men had suffered tragically in their lives. They had experienced the worst of what humans can do to each other. And they merely asked the question, how did you rise above the suffering in your life? And they spoke about this through their individual lenses of Christianity and Buddhism. But they found some fundamental truths that I think we all have in our lives, no matter the degree of suffering. And they talked about how pain happens to all of us. There isn't some sort of magical divide between who you are as a practitioner and who's sitting across from you as a patient. We all go through those traumas of life. We all have those instances where we struggle. And in Buddhism, they talk about the 2 arrows of suffering. The first arrow is the initial injury. Whatever happened to you originally, whatever that might be, we all are pierced by those arrows. And the second arrow, which is what the mind does in response to that original pain. The second journey of suffering. This notion that as we respond to that original threat or injury or trauma, the anxiety, the emotional anguish, the uncertainty of life, how am I going to deal with this? How will I survive? And even on a deeper level, sometimes it's an illness where people feel like they're losing the control of their body and even their identity. And as we sort of break open to this, every major religion talks about this notion of minding the light, finding something inside of yourself that allows you to sort of deal with that second arrow and find some grace and growth. And I think the challenge is not to become embittered and hardened, but instead to continue to open up and remain soft and emotionally resilient, and to say, even when the pains of life occur, I will face them. I will deal with it. And this notion that we have some control over the second arrow, even though there's this hidden injury that happens to your patients, and likely happens to you too, that wounds the tissue of the spirit and the mind. And sometimes I think we get so caught up in the advanced techniques and technology we do, especially here, because it's so alluring. The stem cells and exosomes and peptides and high extract botanicals and nutrients and all the testing, but there's that other narrative. And I ask myself, are we minding the light in our patients? And one of my favorite poets is Lebanese Khalil Gibran, and he writes, and a woman spoke, saying, "Tell us of pain. Your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding, even as the stone of the fruit must break, that its heart may stand in the sun. So must you know pain. Much of your pain is self-chosen. It is the bitter potion by which the physician within you heals your sick self." And these are the sort of tools that I think about when I'm encountering these difficult moments with my patients. The broken souls, they're lost, they're in some sort of darkness, and I might be the last provider, and I can throw hormones at them and peptides and stem cells and the rest, but am I minding their light? And so out of the discussion between the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, they talk about pillars or anchors, just ways that they encountered with and dealt with those difficult moments. And they had two categories, mind and heart, to find some perspective and meaning in whatever is going on in your patient's life and helping them discover that grace and growth, to have a little humility to say, it happens to all of us, me included. And even, and this is a hard one for me sometimes when life is rough, to laugh, find a little humor, but ultimately acceptance that this is just part of the human condition. And in the heart, forgiveness. Forgiveness for people that have harmed you, and the anger that you might have saying, why did this happen? And even gratitude to find that lesson, whatever that might be. And compassion, which is the feeling compelled to act, which is why I think we're all here, because we want to deal with the suffering of our patients, and we feel compelled to act. And I think there's a special sense in our community in particular, because we were called to do something more than what regular medicine could offer. I think that's why, in part, why we're here today. And there's a spirit of generosity in that you put all of you on the line to do what we do, and to wade into that difficult space that not a lot of practitioners are willing to go. And it reminds me of my original training when I was 17 years old, and most of my instructors were Tibetan and Zen Buddhist monks when I learned traditional Chinese medicine and Japanese Zen Shiatsu. That's how I started on my journey. And what was interesting is that they wouldn't let me touch another patient until I could demonstrate that I was mindful and present and quiet and could listen and hold the emotional space of another person who was in pain. And not an easy thing to do when you're 17 years old and a freshman in college. I had to go to group therapy, and art therapy, and journal, and fast, and meditate, and try and find something inside of myself that they said, okay, you're ready. And it reminds me of a quote that I love, and it's by a surgeon who's also a poet. His name is Richard Seltzer, and this occurred many, many, many years ago when the Dalai Lama and his personal physician was asked to do grand rounds at a hospital in Boston. And you could imagine this sort of wizened saffron robe monk floating from hospital room to hospital room, and the surgeons in their starch white coats following behind, wondering, what is this man doing? And so Dr. Seltzer writes about this as he's observing the monk sitting at the bedside of a woman, and he says, His eyes are closed as he feels for the pulse. In a moment, he's found the spot. And for the next half hour, he remains thus, suspended above the patient like some exotic golden bird with folded wings, holding the pulse of the woman beneath his fingers and cradling her hand in his. All the power of the man seems to be drawn down into this one purpose. And I know that I, who've palpated 100,000 pulses, have not felt a single one. I think we're all seeking that moment of grace, of being seen, of being known. We've all experienced the fractures of life where we feel like we're being splintered into a million pieces. Loss, death, grief, betrayal, heartache. And we look to the heavens and we ask God, why me? Patients will say that all the time. Why me? And God looks back and says, why not you? What makes you so special? And it's a challenge. How will you deal with the second arrow? How will you, as a healer and a practitioner, talk to your patients and help them mind the light? So we have that choice. And it's not an easy path. The path of the healer is difficult. It can be even dangerous if you take on the pain of your patients. And this is a slide that I gave last year. And I was thinking, how is the sort of director of academic affairs, my responsibility, how will I fulfill that in terms of the curriculum at A4M? And I thought, if I just taught all of these tools and technology around medical services, systems biology and prevention and wellness and regenerative therapies and traditional healing systems and regular medicine and omics, combined with the power of technology and big data and artificial intelligence and machine learning, I said, I can sleep at night. That I've done my job to create the master technician. And I think we do a very good job of that. But sitting in my clinic and watching the parade of patients, I realized there's something a lot more than that. And the proposition is, will you be just the master technician? But also, how will you address the human spirit? How will you talk to your patients that are suffering? How will you reach them? How will you let them know that they're known? And I thought, I look back at that and think something was missing. I had missed something last year. Where was I failing or deficient as a provider, as a teacher, as a person? Had I lost something along the way? Retreated into that cold, sterile world of objective data and evidence-based medicine? Was it a defense or something more fundamental, an erosion that happens? What we do is hard. What we deal with is hard. You have to know a lot, and you have to bring all of yourself to those encounters. And sometimes it has to happen to you to find that path. And it happened to me. This was me, young, fit, competitive triathlete, had completed all of my early training in traditional medicine, optimistic, naive. And one day, without thinking about it, I brushed a tick off the back of my leg. I was in Virginia. I didn't know anything about Lyme disease. And my health started to erode. I couldn't run from here to there without shortness of breath. My memory started to go. I got very anxious and sweaty, and I couldn't deal in social situations. I gained a lot of weight. I had no idea why. I was entering that dark space. And this went on. And I think because I was so healthy, that it took a while for me to figure out that something was deeply a problem in my life. Until 10 years later, I realized I was feeling the way my patients were complaining. So I did a test, and sure enough, I had Lyme disease. So I treated myself with antibiotics for about a year and only felt a little bit better. Did more testing and realized that I was also sick from mold. And the Lyme had triggered an inflammatory response where now I was reacting to my environment. And this was me at my heaviest, my most depressed, my most lost. And I thought, it happened to me. I couldn't believe it. With all of my training, with all of my experience, and I'd lost my life too. So Gibran writes, like sheaves of corn, he gathers you unto himself. He threshes you to make you naked. He sifts you to free you from your husks. He grinds you to whiteness. He kneads you until you're pliant. And then he assigns you to a sacred fire that you may become sacred bread for God's sacred feast. But if in your heart you would seek only love's peace and love's pleasure, then it is better for you to cover your nakedness and pass out of love's threshing floor into the seasonless world where you shall laugh, but not all of your laughter, and weep, but not all of your tears. He knew what Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama were talking about, striving to remain pliant and soft, even as we're ground a little finer. And there's a power in the process of listening to your patient's stories, letting them talk, being present and listening, to be quiet and mindful. And I think in some ways this is the allure and the failure of precision medicine, this hope that in a biological sense, when you can measure all the details around a patient at every level, we think we get closer to truth. But are you any closer to their truth? And this notion that we exist between the known and the unknown world, what we can measure, but also as a healer entering that dark space with the patient, maybe you are the last guide for them. And in medical anthropology, Michael Meade writes about this notion that humans go through these moments in their lives called an initiating event, something that ruptures the foundation of the person. And now the world has changed, and they're losing their identity, they're very uncertain, and they're lost in, quote, the dark forest. And there are secrets in there. And sometimes we as a practitioner have to enter that forest with them and to be their guide and to listen and to shepherd them through those challenges. There's a power in people's story. And hopefully, not only will you pull the patient back together with their physical health, but you'll help them return to community with maybe a little bit of wisdom and even as an elder. When life happens to us, the fracturing and the minding of the light is where empathy begins. I know immediately when I see a patient who's suffering from mold or Lyme or some other exposure, because I feel it. It's in me. And that was one of the gifts that I had received. And when you turn empathy into compassion, the feeling that you need to act to help the other, that's where grace and growth begins. And Rumi writes, the wound is the place where the light enters you. And as we break open, as I broke open, it allowed me to help many, many, many more people. And I think this forms the basis of the therapeutic relationship: self-awareness, presence, listening, empathy, compassion, and trust. This is the glue that will hold you together. And so, as I was feeling very broken and a little sorry for myself back in 2014, I said, I have skills and I have gifts. What am I going to do about it? What am I going to do about that second arrow? And I said, well, let's start collecting data. Because when I turned to the medical textbook, guess what? That chapter was blank. Nobody knew much of anything about what was going on. So I thought, maybe this is my purpose. And my work carried me through proteomics and the field of neuroinflammation and brain-related changes, and eventually we dove down deep into genomics, and we opened a research lab that focuses on transcriptomics, or measuring patterns of gene expression. And it turns out what was really happening at the core was the mitochondria were orchestrating these predictable cellular responses to biological threats. Who knew that the mitochondria were actually the brains of the cell? And did you know that the mitochondria controls an enormous amount of molecular pathways? Everything from nutrient balance and inflammation to lipid status and sequestration of heavy metals, methylation sequences, gut function and dysbiosis, you name it. I didn't know. We didn't know. This was all new science. And when you threaten a cell, when you threaten a person, it's the first thing that changes. And so we started looking at those patterns of gene expression, and we found that there were predictable changes in the way that the mitochondria were responding throughout the body. That it wasn't just molecular, it was within networks of tissues and organs, all the way up through influencing mood and emotions and coping skills and how the person acts in the world. And we saw the ways in which those changes were occurring in the patterns of those genes. All mitochondrial genes, energy disposition, hypercoagulation. Hopkins and UCLA found the genes that turn on for Lyme disease. We found the genes that turn on for water-damaged buildings, chronic inflammation, and even a gene for emotional trauma, a mitochondrial gene. Histamine, neuronal loss, brain-related changes, all part and parcel to this complex illness. And so then the proposition was, okay, we started to understand what was going on, but now what? What are you going to do? And it turns out we had to do everything. The entire anti-aging toolkit is brought to bear in these patients. Nutrition, yes. Diet and exercise and nutrients, yes. But also peptides and hormones and high extract botanicals and regenerative therapies and all the rest. We had to do everything. Everything we teach at A4M. And magic happened. Genes started to go back to normal. Energy returned. Blood flow improved. We got people out of water-damaged buildings. We turned off their inflammation. We even were able to correct their emotional trauma, reduce their histamine, and even heal their brains. Magic. So this notion that we're able to teach all of this at A4M, I think, is incredibly special. And I can create the master technician. We can. But don't forget, your patients come to you because they're suffering. So how will you address that? How will you talk to them? How will you listen? Will you be present and mindful? Will you let them tell their story and hope for that moment of transformation and growth, to find grace in their illness? And never forget that they're on a journey, and you might be their last shepherd. And ultimately, at least for today and this weekend, I'd like you to reflect on, can you find your purpose as a healer? Why are you here today? And can we do both, and do both well? Can we be the master technician and also bring compassion and loving kindness and presence to those people that will invariably be wounded? And I think we can. Now, I have a lot of people to thank. There's so many that work behind the scenes here at A4M. Some of you have contact with them, many of you don't. Doreen Brown and Liz Wheeler and Tiffany Duke and Amy Paoletti. our teaching faculty, our core, Dr. Swedan and Laval and Houston and Rosenberg, and all the countless people that sit behind the scenes. An extraordinary group, an army, a small army to deliver what I think is world-class education. We've built a mini university. Our education is stellar. It is at a graduate level of any major university. We have 2 yearly conferences, board certification, 4 fellowships, advanced specialties, distance learning, workshops and modules, longitudinal courses, incredible faculty, and CME from George Washington University. Our fellowship there's no comparison for the core fellowship in anti-aging medicine. What we teach you is the core skill set to encounter just about any patient that you'll see in your practice. And we've gone even further. We have pre-conference learning online. We'll have you read academic articles, book chapters, answer discussion questions, interact with faculty. Then you come to the live events. And then you go home and you'll synthesize that information with case analysis and discussion with faculty and other attendees, just like any graduate course. We also have longitudinal courses, 2 to 6 weeks long, on hormone replacement for men and women, cardiology, and mold and Lyme. And when you look at where our faculty comes from, it's all the major universities. This is the quality of the education that we now offer at A4M. It's something that I know I feel honored to be a part of, and I've done it for so many years now, but proud of what we do here as a community, and thankful that you all are here with us today. And I thought, how am I going to end this? So I'm sitting on my desk, and I'm looking at my computer, and then I look up, and I have a painting that sits over my computer. And I understood what I had to say. So if you'll forgive me, I'm going to take another few minutes and tell a story. Because as I said, there's power in stories. In the spirit of transformation and hope. And this story begins a long time ago in a far-off land, as all good stories should. And little did you know, it involves each of you too. About 75 years ago, a 13-year-old girl living in Istanbul gave birth to a little girl named Lily. And Lily was marched off to an orphanage at age 4 because that fragile family had fractured apart. She remembers being led to the gates where 39 little girls were staring back, 39 pairs of eyes, and Lily was the 40th. She was raised by French nuns until the age of 17. When she finally was able to leave the orphanage, she had discovered that her mother had since come to the United States. So brave little Lily, with little money, got on a plane to rediscover her mother and rebuild a life. She arrived in D.C. full of hope, but found her mother had taken up with a man suffering from shell shock from the Great War, and he raged and he was an alcoholic. And Lily was heartbroken. One day she was walking down a street and a cab pulls over, and he says, "Do you need a ride? Do you need help?" And she hands him a note, and it's in French. And it's an address. And the cab driver actually happens to have a French to English dictionary. So he reads the note, because of course he doesn't speak French. And he says, "I can take you there." And when he drops her off, he says, "If you ever need anything, call my number. I'll help." So Lily kept calling. So there were more cab rides and more notes. And eventually they fell in love. An unlikely pair, a farm boy from the hills of West Virginia and a girl who grew up in an orphanage on the streets of Istanbul. Lily and Keith moved in together and soon became pregnant, but they knew they couldn't keep the child or give it the life it deserved. So they called an adoption agency. And to their relief, they were told that this young infant will be raised by physicians. A life surrounded by kindness and service, not unlike yours. But that child was not raised by physicians, but raised in a good family. So I was born on a Friday. Lily took me home for 9 days, where she bonded with me for all of that time. And you can imagine her pain and suffering when she got the call to take me back to the hospital. Imagine offering up your newborn to the unknown, that he may have a better life. How brave and sad and wonderful. I was raised by my parents, Bill and Sue. They're kind and loving and decent. And you only need to know 2 things about them. They've been there for me every day, every step of the way, without fail. And they've been there for each other every day, every step of the way, without fail. And their 60th wedding anniversary is this summer. So Lily's little boy became a son, and Bill and Sue whispered it back across that impermeable divide, "We got this. We got him. He'll be okay." Every year, Lily and Keith would light a candle and wonder where I was. Who would I become? They never had another child, but managed to stay together all this time, until one day, 5 years ago, through the power of Ancestry.com, they received a call by a family member that said their little boy had resurfaced. All this time later, Lily and Keith immediately went to the internet, and they saw all these videos on YouTube of me lecturing on various medical topics. They couldn't believe it. Their son had become a physician. Lily and I met on a cloudy day in Virginia. And I remember the first time she proudly told a waitress, over many drinks and tears, "This is my son." We have since slowly rebuilt the bond that was lost all those years ago, and a new family was made. And I'm pleased to say that Lily and Keith are sitting here in the audience today, watching their son give a live lecture for the first time. I want you to both know your little boy is okay. That he was given more love and support and gifts than anyone deserves. And in return, I've dedicated my life to alleviating the suffering of others. Your pain and ultimate sacrifice has been transformed into grace and healing. I'm grateful for my life, for my parents, Bill and Sue. And so what was I looking at when I was thinking about all of this? It was a painting that I had commissioned. And in the center, inscribed, are the names, Lily and Keith, Bill and Sue, those that made me and those that raised me. It hangs and reminds me of my purpose. And it says in Hebrew around the outside, "Whoever saves a single life saves the world entire." All 4 of you saved my life. You saved my world. And I now think about the many patients that I've helped over the past 30 years, the parade of broken souls who I've tried to put back together one tender piece at a time. And maybe even more importantly, I stand with humility and thanks before each of you this morning, having touched many of your lives, often quietly behind the scenes, overseeing your education. Through A4M, I reflect on the thousands of practitioners that we've trained over the years around the globe, who've gone on to heal and save countless worlds. Our deep work is to transform lives and transform medicine. It is an absolute good. I imagine many of you sitting here in the audience have had your own transformative moment at A4M. You found some sort of truth that was the antidote to the feeling that you'd reached the boundaries of regular medicine. Many don't realize the brave choice that you've made to take the deep breath and walk into that dark mystery, departing the sterile, comfortable confines of drugs and surgery and, quote, standard of care. And you likely asked yourself at some point, can I do this? Should I risk my reputation, my career? Am I throwing it all away? I'm certain, though, for many of you, whatever you found along the way in this very personal journey, a compelling speaker, an insightful lecture, a magical result in clinic, once you found it, it changed you forever. An initiating event. We're all ground a little finer. And there's no going back. So on it goes, Lily. Your suffering's been honored the best I could. All the questions have been answered, and the circle is complete. Look around you at all these wonderful people. They're your legacy too. Unfortunately, I don't think I can fit all of your names on my painting. But you're there, I promise, and part of our story now. So I want to thank Lily and Keith and Bill and Sue and all of you for coming this weekend. I want to thank, with sincere gratitude, A4M, especially the CEO, Doreen Brown, and her husband, Bill, who've been fierce and resolute in their leadership and kind to me in only ways they know. They've given me the opportunity to open this conference, to lead your education, and also to tell my story. We're all connected in unexpected and profound ways. So please help me thank them and all the tireless people who work behind the scenes at A4M to make this conference and our world-class education possible. So I wish you all an amazing weekend, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and a happy, peaceful New Year. Enjoy the lectures, and if you have any questions of your learning path or anything related to your education, please come find me or my partner in this journey, Dr. Swadan, and thanks so much for coming today.